Good morning, everyone. It is 10:06, and I'm calling to order the February 16th, 2021 meeting of the County Development Committee, and request, please, that the clerk call the roll.
Berman,
Berman here.
Brown,
Here.
Ford, Iqbal,
Paul present.
Kenyon,
Here.
Woniki,
Woniki present.
Fraz,
Here.
Caius, Mr. Caius, Martin.
And Martin present. We have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the January 19th, 2021 meeting. May I have a motion?
Woniki moves.
Nikki moves. Do I have a second? Mr. Brown seconds. Do we have comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Woniki,
Yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Caius, Martin.
Martin, yes. We have monthly financials in our packet. Is there anyone present from the office to comment personally? Seeing no one, hearing no one, please contact the Finance Department if you have any questions regarding what they've submitted. Relative to public comment, I know we have a few speakers today. I'm going to ask people that are directing their comments toward a specific petition to speak at that time. Do we have anybody online or present who is asking to address the committee on a non-agenda item today? Hearing no one, then we will move forward to the Building and Zoning Division. Mr. Van Kerkhoff. And we have our Building and Zoning report.
Good morning, everyone. Building and zoning team continues to be working remotely and accepting applications and issuing permits and documents via email. It continues to work really well. Our inspectors continue to go out and do on-site inspections, and we continue to follow up with other issues that arise from a property maintenance standpoint, and as well as we've had unfortunately, we've had a number of house fires that we're working with the homeowners to work on those damage assessments and get their homes and lives back in order as quickly as possible. Be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them at this time.
Are there any questions of Mr. Van Kerkhoff? Hearing none, then let's move forward to zoning petitions, the first being petition number 4569.
Okay, good morning. Blair, can you put the PowerPoint up? I think I've got the clicker here, so.
The clicker's not gonna.
Oh, okay, the first petition this morning is number 4569, Martha Cabral, requesting rezoning from F District Farming to B3 District Business with a special use for truck parking. You can advance the slide. Here is the subject location on the 2040 future land use map. You can see it's in an area, a green that's planned for agriculture. It's right adjacent to proposed open space. This is an area that's the headwaters of Blackberry Creek. To the north, you see existing public open space that's owned by Campton Township for protecting those headwaters. And then you see Elburn to the west. You can advance the slide. Here it is on the zoning map. You can see that Campton Hills is to the north and Elburn is to the west. And all the area south of 38 there to the east-west and south of the subject property are all zoned F District Farming in the county. Next slide. Here it is on an aerial. You can just see the trending character and existing uses of the land for farming, punctuated by some existing farmsteads. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit closer up aerial, again in context. There's a little branch of drainage that runs right along the property and some floodplain as well. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up. You can see in this case, an aerial photo, that the proposed area for truck parking already exists, as well as in this photo, trucks in place. That's because this started out as we're notified of a concern on the property and gave notice to the property owner that they're in violation of the stormwater ordinance for constructing the parking area and the zoning ordinance for parking commercial non-agricultural use trucks. Their response to the violation, they have removed the trucks and working with engineer to satisfy the requirements for the stormwater violation. But before completing that process, they've requested this zoning, which would allow them to park their non-agricultural construction trucks on the parcel. Next slide, please. Here's a area platted for, or not platted, but surveyed and legally defined for the area they're proposing to rezone to the B3 with the special use for the truck parking. Next slide, please. Staff recommended stipulations. There's a number of them related to water resources. Jody Welnick is here in the room if you have any questions on them specifically. Next slide, please. Also a stipulation recommended by the Division of Transportation for a 33-foot half right-of-way. Next slide, please. Staff recommend findings of fact that the proposed B3 special use, a business with a special use for truck parking, is not consistent with the 2040 plan adopted by the Kane County Board, and the proposed use is not consistent with the trend and character of other uses in the surrounding area. Next slide, please. This did go to the Regional Planning Commission because they were requesting a land use that is not consistent with the 2040 future land use map. Regional Planning Commission recommends denial of this petition, citing that the use is not part of the uses planned for in the agricultural area. There is an objector, a neighboring property owner to the east. Zoning Board of Appeals also unanimously recommended denial of this petition, and it's before you this morning. I believe the petitioner may be on the line, as well as their engineer, to make any comments and address any questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to motion here, I would like to have the speakers with an opportunity to address the committee. The first on my line, excuse me, I assume, Mrs. Cabral, that you want to offer testimony, or are you here to answer questions?
Well, I'm here to answer questions, and the testimony. I mean, we only have three commercial trucks, 3 construction trucks that we use seasonally. They're only parked here during the construction season. They come in clean. They do not have any, we don't store anything, any fuels or anything. We don't do any maintenance on them here. We do all maintenance off-site in professional shops. If when maintenance is needed, it's just an overnight parking. They leave at 6 a.m. They're usually back at 9 until 4. There's now in and out. Constant traffic. So once they leave, they're gone for the entirety of the day. They only work Monday through Friday, up until maybe October, early November. Then they're done until the spring, and they're just they're off and parked. We will the site's a little big. When we brought in the material, it just ended up kind of spreading that out like that. We intend to make it smaller, and so it's not as large, and it's just for the 3 trucks. It's a company that's owned and operated by my husband. We have 2 employees. It's unionized. And I can address any other concerns that there is.
Okay, thank you. And for the record, Mrs. Cabral is the petitioner, so I didn't ask her for her name or address. I would request that any other speakers offer their name and address as they approach the podium. And the protocol is that speakers get 3 minutes to discuss or to make their presentation. The next I show here is Mr. Noren. Would you please approach the desk and,
Nievenhoven.
oh, we're short a microphone.
Yes.
Good morning, John Nievenhoven, Village of Elburn, Village Administrator, 301 East North Street, Elburn, Illinois. I'm here this morning to reiterate the Village Board's and residents' opposition to the rezoning of this property. It does not fit within the comprehensive land plan for the Village of Elburn, and it also does not fit for the Kane County land plan for that area. I'll keep my comments brief, but just reiterate that we agree with staff as well that this rezoning should be denied. It doesn't fit, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I show next John Tabergi.
Yes, John Teberg with Teberg Engineering. I've been assisting.
We're having some
Mr. Bowles.
difficulty. If you could turn your volume up or move closer to the speaker, it would help. Thank you.
Okay. John Teberg with Teberg Engineering. I've been assisting the Cabrols through this process. We completed a topo survey of wetland delineation and other exhibits. So we're proposing just to rezone about 1/3 of an acre, enough to put his trucks on. So if there's any other questions engineering wise.
Okay, thank you. We'll hold then your presence in abeyance here until we have a chance for the committee to speak. Do we have any other individuals who want to speak regarding this petition? Hearing none, then I would request a motion from the committee. Mr. Fraz moves. Do I have a second? Mr. Brown seconds.
Second.
Comments or questions, please, from the board. Mr. Fraz?
Yeah, this is in my district, and I do feel for the petitioner. It's a fairly small business, and it's been there a long time. But if you look at the history, as this petition has moved through the process, we have an objecting neighboring property owner. We have the Regional Planning Commission denial, Zoning Board denial, and we've had a speaker and communications with the Village of Elburn requesting that this be denied. So at this point, I cannot support this petition. Again, it's fairly small, but it is easily visible from Route 38. There's been no attempt to screen with trees or fencing of any kind. And the ultimate use of this area will likely either be residential or open space, which would be not conducive for this type of zoning. So I'll be voting no.
Do I have other comments or questions?
Chairman Martin, Wonicky here.
Ms. Winicky?
This is on the edge of my district. Of course, Fraz's and my district butt up to each other. And I concur with Mr. Fraz. Our own Regional Plan Commission denied, Zoning Board denied, Elburn's not in favor, and I believe the Village of Campton Hills is also not in favor. So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Berman,
Mr. Berman?
thank you. What's the acreage of this parcel?
Mark, can you give us the acreage of the parcel sought to be rezoned?
Maybe their engineer can address that. I don't have the the exact acreage of,
Yeah.
in front of me of the parcel, but it's a much smaller area that they're requesting for the rezoning, just the parking area. But maybe
Well,
Mr.
yeah, it's a third of an acre out of the 6 acres.
6 acres?
No, a third.
Well,
The
a third is all
0.34.
the rezoning.
I'm sorry, there was conflict between the two speakers. Who can address the question of the acreage of the parcel sought to be rezoned?
It's, this is Martha. It's 0.34. It's a third of the 6 acres. It's a very small part of the entirety. It's not the entirety.
So it's the entire, your entire parcel is
No.
24 acres and this is,
No, our acreage is 6 acres.
okay?
This would be only 0.34 acres. So a third, just 0.34.
Okay, thank you.
And then it would be, I know that if it was approved, that we would work with the engineer to provide that that fencing or those trees that they would be requesting. And that would be part of the next plan if it was to be approved.
Thank you. Are there any other, Mr. Brown?
Just a comment. I'd like to echo what Mr. Fraz has said about this. I do feel for the petitioner, but one question I do have is it is a requirement that the county must notify the villages that have got the land plan within that area, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah,
A
that's
mile
correct.
and a half.
Every village that within its extraterritorial jurisdiction, which we do.
Right. And I respect that, and I think that's very important. I think it's also very important that the committee and the board take very seriously what those villages say when they have a comment on something like this. So I will not be supporting this as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments from the committee? Mr. Fries?
I'll reserve my comment for after the vote, please.
Okay. Well, and I would join with the statements made that we need to recognize the integrity of the process. And as we sit here today, we have a regional planning commission and a zoning board of appeals in a municipality who recognize that this does not conform to either current or future plans for the area. So I too will be non-supportive. Are there any other comments? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
No.
Brown,
No.
Ford,
No.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
No.
Wonicky,
Wonicky, no.
Fraz,
No?
Caius.
Caius, no.
Thank you.
Motion fails to pass.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for Mark. So in this situation, what's the next step for the petitioner as far as they're currently operating there? I'm just hoping we could be as generous as possible since they've been there so long, as far as giving them time to find another location.
Sure. Well, currently, in order to come into compliance, they've removed the trucks from the property. So those are my understanding, at a location that
Correct.
they've leased for that. So the zoning violation, has been complied with by removing the trucks. Their next step is for this petition to go before the full board at the March meeting. If it were to be denied, they would need to work with Water Resources still to resolve the stormwater violation, either by removing the material or some other, aspect, and maybe Jody can address that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just concerned if they're still operating there, I don't think we need them to vacate right away. Immediately. Yeah, so, thank you.
Thank you. The next matter before us is petition 4570 in Caneville Township.
Blair, could you advance the slide? Thank you. So this is petition 4570, Vernon and Diane Long requesting a rezoning from F District Farming to F1 District Rural Residential to allow the creation of 3 residential parcels. Next slide, please. This is it on our 2040 plan. It's an area that's solidly in the agriculture area. The part of the, or majority of the area where these proposed parcels are an area in the 2040 plan for open space that generally reflects the natural features, in this case, trees, mostly on the lot, large oak trees. If you could advance the slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, we may have, can you go back one? We may have skipped. There we go. Here's the current zoning map. It's an area that's zoned F district farming. You see there are parcels of variety of sizes, but it's all zoned F district farming. Next slide, please. Here's an aerial. You can see sort of the trend in character as well as the character of the area proposed for the rezoning. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up, again showing the mostly treed area.
Wow.
There is an existing home on the what would be the middle parcel. So the creation of the 2 additional parcels would be for family members. Next slide, please. Here's another close-up. Next slide, please. So the proposal would create 3 parcels zoned F1, which is our residential use, and lots smaller than 40 acres in the agricultural area. Part of the requirements in the zoning ordinance for qualifying to create an F1 is that that productive farmland is not being taken out of production, and that's the case. So these qualify for this rezoning request. Next slide, please. Here's the actual plat. It shows the existing home. So while it creates 3 zoning parcels for residential use, 1 is already in existence, so it would create potential for 2 new additional residences to be constructed. Next slide, please. Here are Water Resources recommended stipulations. I won't read through those in detail, but Jody Welnick is here to answer any questions. Next slide, please. As well as the Division of Transportation for some stipulations for establishing new access points and permitting those access points. Next slide, please. Staff recommend findings of fact that this would create 2 new residential parcels, and as I mentioned, they are consistent with the requirements for the F1 district. Next slide, please. This did not need to go to the Regional Planning Commission because it is consistent with the land use plan. Zoning Board recommends approval with the staff stipulations, and it's before you this morning for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. May we please have a motion? Mr. Fraz moves. Mr. Kenyon seconds. Comments or questions? Mr. Fraz.
Yeah, Mark, I don't know if you know what the acreage of each of those 3 would be, but it looks fairly substantial, like maybe 8 or so acres per lot.
Yeah, they're all at least over 5 acres.
Yeah, they're all fairly big. Yeah, so I guess I would say that looking at this close-up even, there's 3 other farmsteads in view there. And for this to be used as ag usage, those trees would all have to come down. So this preserves the trees and very, very, very low density. And I know the family's been out there forever, and I would support this.
Okay, I believe they may be on the line if there's any questions or comments from the petitioner.
Of the committee, do we have any other questions or comments? Do I have anyone from the public that wants to speak on this petition?
I'm John Thornhill, here on behalf
Thornhill,
of the petitioners.
you want to give your name and address?
John Thornhill, 44 White Oak Circle, St. Charles, Illinois. Mark has pretty well covered the details of this proposal. And as he indicated, all of the parcels are 5.6 or 5.8 acres. That's very appropriate because, as you mentioned earlier, most of the property is designated on the 2040 plan as open space. And since this does not adjoin anything that the Forest Preserve District already owns, it's unlikely that it would ever be extended. The district would ever extend its holdings into this area. So we feel the spirit of the preservation of open space is still being fulfilled with the size of these parcels. And one of them would be used by a family member that intends to build on one of them, build its own house in the next year or so. So that's what kind of tipped the scale to have this move forward with the rezoning. Other than that, we're aware of the stipulations and expect to have them fulfilled during the process as we go forward with construction. I'd be glad to answer the other question. Diane Long, I think, is on the line as well.
And just for purposes of the record, am I correct in saying that you're the representative of the applicant?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address this issue? Hearing nothing with the, Tom?
Yeah, I apologize. Comment number 2, I meant to have that replace comment number 1, so they sound redundant, but comment number 2, each parcel shall have only one Harder Road access. That's the comment that for sure we want within the stipulations. Again, I apologize for the redundant number 1 and 2.
So is 1 out then?
Yeah, you can just get rid of 1 and 2 is the comment.
Okay, so the recommendation from staff excludes or eliminates number 1. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Woniki,
Woniki, yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Petition will be recommended for approval. The final zoning petition on file today is petition 4571 in Caneville Township. Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This petition is requesting rezoning from F District Farming to F2 District Agricultural Related Sales with a special use for a tree service business. Next slide, please. Here it is on the 2040 plan. This is also an area their 2040 plan future land use map shows for agriculture. You can see from the zoning map, it's also all zoned F District Farming at this time. There was one error we discovered on our map. The northwest corner of Kesslinger Road and Schrader Road. If the laser pointer will work for me here. At this location actually has an existing F2 that was granted by the county board. You'll see that in the aerial. So there is another F2 business in the vicinity. Next slide, please. Here is on the aerial, you can see the trend and character of the farmland. You can see in the area of the proposed rezoning, there are a number of agricultural and residential uses, and this is the other existing F2. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit closer aerial of that. And again, the other F2 landscape business there. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up of the subject area to be rezoned. The petitioner is proposing to leave the balance of the property in F District Farming and use that for growing trees and other plant material consistent with the agricultural zoning. The F2 business use is required for this portion of it because they do plan to convert the existing single-family residence for use for their offices. And then there is an existing large pole barn building that had been constructed and gravel areas surrounding it that they would be using for their business. They would be parking their trucks inside, but using the yard for materials and some additional hoop houses for growing. But you can see from the aerial that the most of what they would be proposing for this F2 business already exists. Next slide, please. Here is a plat survey of the parcel. Again, you can see the house and the improvements. Next slide, please. This is their proposed site plan. Again, you can see the existing house and yard. Their plans for planting a tree and plant material on the property and some growing houses, which will also be consistent with agricultural use. Next slide, please. Staff recommended stipulations from Water Resources are there for your review. Next slide, please. And there are some stipulations from KDOT. And again, Tom is here also if there's any other questions with that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Staff recommended findings of fact that the rezoning would allow a tree service company to be based on the existing central portion of the property. The type of business is consistent with other F2 businesses that the board has approved land use changes for, since they are related to agriculture and are going to be propagating trees on the property. Next slide, please. This was not applicable for the Regional Planning Commission since it's consistent with the future land use plan. The neighboring property owner to the west was objecting to the use with concerns about the business use on the property. Zoning Board of Appeals recommended approval with the staff recommend stipulations, and it's before you this morning.
Do we have anyone in the audience who wants to address this petition? I believe there are
Yes,
two individuals here that are here to comment. Should it be necessary, am I correct? Do you want to speak or do you just want to address questions?
Address questions.
Okay, thank you.
John will speak for me.
I'm John Thornhill again. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner, Ted Rennie, who intends to develop his Skyline Tree Service business on this location.
And you still have the same address?
I reside at 44 White Oak Circle in St. Charles, Illinois. If you look at back at some of the other exhibits, you'll see that there are several 15-acre parcels along this area of Kesslinger Road. These were divided up and created in the early 90s when single-family residences were permitted use on a 15-acre parcel. And in those days, people would buy the 15 acres, they'd put up a house, and then have a farmette until they got tired of the maintenance and everything else. And I think you know the story of so many of them across the county that we have. During that period of time, since the house was built, an earlier owner had a contracting business that he ran on this same property. And at some point, the large pole building was constructed, which is still on the site, and actually became an attraction for the current buyer and petitioner, Ted Rennie, because it's ideal for storing his equipment, his trucks and things that he uses in his business. So in the course of his due diligence, he found that the property is well suited for his use. However, the history of illegitimate use for construction purposes was not known even to anybody at the county, I believe. So we're coming before you with a proposal to use the existing infrastructure on this property, which includes the pole building and the single family house, which had been finished off in the basement area for offices. And those offices would be used for the tree service business as well. In addition, Mr. Rennie intends to live in the house. This is his personal residence. So he's not going to be an absentee landlord or user of the property at all. The one objector that we had has a horse operation to the west of this property, and I think was more concerned about the activity on this property, which he hasn't seen for quite some time because of the tree service being conducted. But the stipulations that have been offered establish the hours of operation, the head count of personnel. And it's a pretty low impact use considering the hours of operation and the head count of people that the company. So the earlier reference of stipulation from stormwater management referenced some berms near Kesslinger Road. The berms were part of a discussion early on when we had a staff meeting, but they never became a part of the site development plan that's before you. There are no berms, and the reason for that is there's an unstudied floodplain that runs very close to the right-of-way line of Kesslinger Road, and we would not want to impact anything affecting the floodplain. So the purpose of this is to rezone a little less than 3 acres of the property that Mr. Rennie owns to use for the tree service business, including the house and the offices therein. The remainder of the property will be used for growing nursery stock, trees, evergreens, deciduous, as well as grasses on a majority of the property. All of that's depicted on the site development plan. And another stipulation, I think, was dedication of 60 feet of right-of-way from the center line of the road. Preparation of a drain tile survey has already been conducted and submitted to the Stormwater Management Office. So many of the stipulations have already been fulfilled. And as we move forward, there will be others that will also be submitted as part of this proposal. We'd be glad to answer any other questions. I think Lou Caliento and Ted Rennie perhaps are both on the line and may have other comments, although I don't see their name up.
Thank you, Mr. Thornhill. May we have a motion, please? Mr. Kenyon moves, Mr. Fry seconds. Comments or questions from the committee? Mr. Kenyon.
It seems to me, in my experience, this is the right place for such a business. Right location, and it won't be a negative impact on anybody.
Thank you.
You understand? I'm agreeing he should put it there.
Mr. Fry.
My question, either for the petitioner or Mr. Thornhill, is Skyline a tree planting company or tree? I thought they were a tree removal company. I just want to define exactly what they do.
Tree service, I believe in Mr. Rennie's operation is a full service, which means he not only removes trees, but they replant trees. My dad was in that business as well, and he did just about everything, even trimmed bushes at times. So
I guess my concern is I'm supporting this because looking at the site plan, it appears to be a nursery operation for the most part. And we do have one door over on the corner there. But my concern is, as far as the tree removal portion of the business, we have had trouble over time with that kind of operation as far as people bringing, big tree trunks back and stacking them and leaving them there for 20 years and mulch piles and things like that. So I'm just curious what the petitioner does with the trees that they remove. What I'm really getting at more than anything is I don't want, and I suppose we could put a stipulation in, but I don't want any kind of large scale mulching or chipping machine on site. They make these ones that are about the size of a semi-trailer. And if I understand right, that would be possibly permissible here. So as far as the neighbors' concerns, I want to just make sure that large scale chipping and mulching of materials brought to the site would not take place.
I'm not aware of that being a part of their operation, but if that was to be a stipulation, I'm sure the petitioner would not object to it.
The petitioner, if the petitioner would like to address, please offer your name and address, please.
Franny?
Yeah.
I'm at 50W 254 Kesslinger Road. And we are not planning any of that. In fact, Vessels is on the way going from in town to out there for us to do all our dumping. And that's right along Fabian and Main Street, Batavia. We also in town have Midwest Compost where we dump also, but that's not our intention at all. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I had some of the same concerns Drew had with that. But going along with that same line, would it be your intent to bring your removed trees in and cut them up and split them for firewood usage?
No, that is not my intention at all.
Okay.
Nor my want. It's too laborious.
So you're more going to be a grower. you're not using this as a,
Okay, well, I want to guide us back on that. We're also, we do plant healthcare and horticulture. So some of the plants are for my own use since it's so open there. I want to block the wind, which comes very fast, as well as there's a lot of water, as I'm understanding from the neighbor that acquires there. So I want to have that absorbed, as well as we want to do some testing with our plant healthcare, as well as horticulture on some of the trees, both deciduous and conifer.
okay. So would you be running, what's the right way to put this? Is this retail or wholesale, what you'd be growing there?
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
Neither.
For his own use.
Okay.
Mr. Van Kerkhoff?
Yeah, I was just going to mention for the committee that our F2 zoning category is a special use by definition. And under that, the site plan and the list of uses in its petition become the business zoning. So the way the petition was submitted along with the site plan, that would not allow for a mulching machinery, mulching piles, firewood piles, storage of tree material. If they were to want to add that use, they would need to come back to this committee or possibly go through rezoning again. And same with any future buyer. But if those can certainly be added by development committee as stipulations, if agreed upon with the petitioner, just to make that crystal clear for the record.
Yes, I would request that, please.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
One last question for clarification then. Listening to the engineer on the phone there, it sounds like that they are not going to be doing the berm on the south end of this?
That's correct.
So that would need to be removed off of this resolution as well?
We never showed it in the first place on any of our plans. It was discussed as a type of barrier, but after we investigated the topography and the floodplain situation, we found that it's really not feasible to do that. And that's why it was never added to any site plans that we've submitted.
Okay. Any more questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky,
Wonecki, yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Petition will be recommended for approval. The next matter before us is the presentation and proposed ordinance related to the change in the current prohibition of adult use cannabis businesses in the county. Mr. Van Kerkhoff is able to present today, should anyone want to see the presentation that he has made before relative to this issue in the county. I would just, not advise, but just comment that the reason that this matter was continued today in principal part was because it was noted that the ordinance as originally drafted created a vacuum of allowing the use without there being any time for the county to in fact establish zoning regulations that would create order to the administration of cannabis growing and commercial activities within the county. So this has been corrected today to in fact put a 90-day hiatus and this enforceability to enable us to pass those ordinances, and that issue has been addressed. So I would ask the committee, as a matter of consensus, is there anyone on the committee that wants to rehear or have represented the presentation originally made by Mr. Van Kerkhoff at the last meeting? Hearing none. And I've forgotten, was this matter tabled?
Yeah, this matter was tabled, and Mr. Chairman, if I could make a couple comments relative to it. It was tabled. There was a request from, I believe, Board Member Shepro in particular, to want to see what draft changes to the zoning ordinance might look like. So that is included in your packet this morning also, and is a memo from me with a little bit of background, some of the conceptual parts of zoning ordinance amendments that the state and other communities have provided for a reasonable accommodation of the businesses, which I'd be happy to go over. And then on the broader picture, Waubonsee Community College has been developing, they've done a lot of their own research on the adult use cannabis businesses and the opportunities for employment and careers, and has been developing certification programs for people wanting to get into that portion of the industry. And they have generously agreed to make a presentation.
Can I come in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Make a presentation to our jobs committee on this Friday at 10 o'clock. So if you want sort of a broader exposure to the latest in terms of the potential for the industry and what one of our community colleges is doing to train people to take those jobs, you can attend that on Friday. With that, I'd be happy to go through an overview of my memo if you'd like at this time.
Let's in matter of process, I think the first thing we need to do is to have a motion to take this matter off the table. Mr. Kenyon moves. Do we have a second?
Kaya second.
Kaya seconds. Do we have any comments or questions on the motion to remove from the table? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Igbo,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky,
Wonicky, yes.
Fraz,
No.
Caius.
Kaya, yes.
Motion carries. The matter's off the table. May I please have a motion so that we can begin discussion of this matter? Mr. Kenyon moves.
Berman, second.
Berman seconds. Comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, what is the motion for?
The motion is for the approval of the ordinance, which would eliminate our past prohibition of commercial cannabis enterprises within the county, unincorporated areas of the county.
So is that the D rescinding the ordinance 19415? Is that what we're looking at right now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so no vote is that you vote no to rescind the ordinance that was passed in 2019. Okay, thank you.
That would be correct. Comments or
Okay,
questions?
thank you.
Mr. Fraz.
Yeah, just speaking on behalf of my district, this was an issue during the last campaign, and my constituents made it very clear that they're not in favor of this, so I'll be voting no.
Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, may I speak one more time, please?
You certainly may.
I concur with Mr. Fraz. Also, I just think that it creates a negative precedence to change an ordinance that was passed in 2019 and rescind the vote of the former board. So I will definitely be voting no. Also, as Mr. Fraz said, my district is the same. I have quite a bit of unincorporated area in my district, and the residents are not in favor of having cannabis businesses within the unincorporated areas in my district. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Kenyon.
I don't necessarily I don't endorse cannabis, but it is a law. And this would permit people to grow it in greenhouses. It would be another industry. When we denied it before, it was because we didn't think the sheriff said he didn't know if he could provide possible policing because it's so far out. But I don't know, I don't want to stand in front of a train because we're not going to stop it. And I just think it should be, well, the whole board we should reconsider it and vote on it. That's all.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee?
Ford.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ford?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of cannabis, but I have to agree with Kenyon that this is a train that we pretty much stand in front of. My concern is that when this legislation was created, it was created so those who had been incarcerated have a chance to get into the business and people of color. And I just want to send out some information, which I will do, that I got from the city of Aurora that kind of covers some concerns that they had as they opened up this door. So I'm glad to hear the comments from our sheriff department that it seems that there may not be any issues. I do have some other concerns, but I'm kind of mixed emotion about it right now. Thank you.
Other comments, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment about a train that you're not going to stop, because I think that's exactly what it is. I can remember years ago, you couldn't buy alcohol in a gas station. Now you can buy alcohol in every gas station there is just about. And I think in the days to come, you're going to be able to buy gummies or what have you in a gas station as well. As Mr. Fries said during the campaign, I was asked the question quite often, was I supportive of cannabis sales and growing in the unincorporated area? And I heard from I obviously heard from a lot of people that were against it, but I obviously heard from a lot of people that were in support of it as well. I'm not a fan of cannabis. I don't use it, never have, don't anticipate using it. And I really appreciate the board a year ago putting this on the table to see how things worked out. I did talk to the sheriff, as has been discussed here a little bit, and he doesn't see where it has caused a detriment in the area, as far as the legalized sale of it in certain areas. So at this point in time, I'm going to support it. I also recently have been talking with a lot of people. Again, have they changed their mind? And one of the things that I've run into is people that have surgery, a knee replacement, for example, they get put on when you come out of it, you get a painkiller. And a lot of people are very hesitant to take painkillers because they can become addictive. But yet they can go down to North Aurora and buy a little gummy, and it really helps them sleep well at night, where they become comfortable. That pain kind of just subsides a little bit. So I do see some benefits from it that I wasn't aware of, a year ago. And I think it is a train that we can't stop anyway. So I'm not going to be trying to stop that train.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Caius?
Caius?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I appreciate the input from all of the board members, and I'll try not to duplicate because I have a number of points I thought that were pertinent. The cannabis is a legal product in Illinois. It's legal to grow, process, distribute, and consume anywhere in the state. But that's been covered. Alcohol is also a controlled substance and legal in Illinois, and we allow that as well. I'd like to point out, I believe that a significant majority of Illinois and the state and Kane County residents support the laws that legalize both alcohol and cannabis. We do have in our county a zoning process, which we're involved in this morning, that provides for residents of any area to either permit or prevent the zoning of a legal business from locating in their neighborhood should there be safety or quality of life considerations. So that may be the place where areas that are not in favor of having this type of industry should address where it should be located. Most of our neighboring counties, it appears, have voted. I believe Mr. Van Kerkhoff has a table of the counties around us that have voted to approve cannabis. So by voting to approve these legitimate businesses in our unincorporated areas, we, in effect, take the regulatory process seriously and allow control of the industry in our area. Otherwise, we're just relying on the counties around us to provide cannabis. Mr. Berman, as he mentioned, can testify to the revenue of legal businesses that the cannabis industry is a significant asset. So revenue is a concern. I know many of you ran on campaigns of looking for alternatively viable sources of revenue for the county, and I believe that this is one such source. It seems to me that some parts of the cannabis industry are more suited to unincorporated industrial or rural areas rather than the municipal settings. Can we not, through our zoning and permitting process, minimize the competition of the county and the municipalities that wish to allow retail sales? That was one of the concerns, that we're competing with the municipalities. We should be able to address that in our zoning. Mr. Berman has also tested and mentioned earlier that the negative side effects for retail cannabis as far as crime are almost non-existent. And I have communicated with the sheriff as well, who will not oppose this because he has not seen in the past year any reasonable increase in crime or detectable, really, crime or any, of crime. We now have the opportunity to regulate it in our county. We now have the opportunity to gain revenue from it. We now have the opportunity to make this change right now. If members of this committee feel that a majority of their constituents do not favor having the growing, processing, distributing, or retailing of in their own district, and that they have an obligation to represent them, as Mr. Fraz and Ms. Winicky have suggested, and I certainly respect that, I also respectfully suggest that they at least allow this resolution to pass to the full board for consideration and input from the entire county. So please consider either passing this resolution so it can be discussed, or abstaining from this vote and making your voice heard at the full board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the committee? Mr. Fraz.
I guess I would just respond to that. You know, there's just a few of us, six or so, that represent the majority of the rural areas. So I think if there's any abstaining to be had, it should be those of you that live in urban districts that are already approved for this type of thing, and maybe abstain or vote present, and let those of us that represent the rural areas that are under consideration represent them.
Bates, please.
First, are there any other committee members?
Or,
okay,
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, when it comes to the medical part of cannabis, I do strongly support it. I have heard about what it can do in outside of taking other medication.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Okay, Mrs. Bates.
Thank you. My district 4, does have about 1/3 in the unincorporated areas, 1/4, 1/3. And I've heard no objections from my constituents. And in a way, this has to do with freedom and allowing people to use their property as they would like. And I would like to put less restrictions rather than more restrictions. And of course, it's also what Mr. Ford said about opportunity, economic opportunity. And I want to voice my support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any
Sanchez
other comments?
here.
Excuse me?
Sanchez.
Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would actually like to voice my support for passing this ordinance. My understanding is that this committee is only an advisory vote anyway, no matter what is decided, that it moves up to the county board. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I did want to voice my support. I do think this is a valid business category that we shouldn't be getting in the way of. Last year, the board decided almost primarily along the idea that it was dangerous or potentially taxing for our sheriff's police. And we know now that's not true. These cannabis businesses don't bring crime to our neighborhoods. As Mr. Brown said, if anything, they might get rid of a few headaches and some aches and pains. So that the whole justification last year was primarily based around, you know, the idea of safety, which the question has been answered at this point. I believe it was Doug Shefflow who was the only one I found to be ideologically consistent in his vote, because he said no to cannabis in general, just as much as he said no to alcohol. For everyone else, it was interesting to me because to say no to cannabis and yes to alcohol seems contradictory. There are many people out west in the county. They're worried these grow houses are going to somehow bring riffraff to their neighborhoods. Maybe, I don't know what the real arguments against this are, but I tell you what, they have people in there. If you're in Virgil Township, there's somebody growing weed in a house somewhere, and there's no harm coming from it. Now that's obviously an illegal operation, and we're trying to make these people legit, give them an opportunity to make real, honest money, not harming anyone or bringing any harm to the community. I think it's really important to remember those commercials from the 80s. Yeah, you know, you have the egg, this is your brain, and then they crack it on a frying pan and it's bubbling up and it says, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? We were brainwashed for years with this kind of propaganda. And this culture largely thinks, our culture largely thinks that cannabis is a drug, the same as crack cocaine or heroin. And so people are just subconsciously inundated with this messaging for decades. So now to say no to cannabis, we see the information available to us, the reality of what cannabis brings. We see lower opiate addiction rates. You know, we see all kinds of positive things and not very many negative, and certainly not what people would think, that we're just allowing drugs in our community. So I would say if we are in districts where constituents are firmly against this, we must ask them why and what is their rationale, and find out, is there any real logical underpinnings for that rationale, or have they fallen victim to the propaganda campaigns that we have undergone in this country for decades. The other thing that concerns me, saying no to this, I worry that it sends a message that Kane County is not business friendly, or that we pick and choose. And that's something that concerns me. And also a comment that I've received after our vote last year, that the county seems out of touch. That why would we be against something that, again, it's a moving train that others have discussed. So that's all I'll say about it. I think we should go ahead with this and do our best to provide due diligence to our constituents about the realities of what cannabis brings to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call the question, I don't want to unfairly skip over, Mark, your memorandum relative to the preliminary amendments. I'm going to ask you if it's appropriate to say that if we deal with this ordinance today and then perhaps next month in some detail discuss the proposed zoning amendments, would that be an appropriate order, or would you?
That's entirely up to the committee. My memo was in response to requests that, what would zoning text amendments look like? How would the county exercise our zoning authority to approve and have reasonable constraints around the adult use cannabis businesses? So that's what I attempted to outline for the county board members in my memo, as well as actual potentially, draft text.
Well, absent objection from the committee, what I'd like to do today is to deal with the fundamental question, and then perhaps next month in greater detail discuss what the regulatory scheme in our zoning ordinance would be. I hear no one objecting to that. So I would, let's see, Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
Not an objection, but it's based on some of the comments I heard from board members. The proposed text amendments that staff has arrived at would make all the businesses a special use in a variety of our existing zoning districts. And by virtue of that, they would not be, staff would be proposing that the businesses would not be permitted uses, in any of our districts, but that they would be special uses, much like you had on your agenda this morning, a special use that would need to be subject to a public hearing, get neighbor input, and reviewed and approved by the full board for those businesses. So they would be allowed, if the ordinance was rescinded, to be considered. but potentially could be a special use in every district, and each business would be fully vetted and approved by the board.
Which would give us more control over this type of usage than a typical zoned use. So any other questions or comments, Mr. Fries?
I guess I do feel compelled to respond to Mr. Sanchez, saying that I should question my constituents and see if they've maybe been misinformed. And I'm amazed that somebody would say that the Just Say No to Drugs advertisements were government propaganda. And I don't know, I'm just astounded by that. So that's just my comment.
Thank you. Any other
Mr.
comments or
Chairman?
questions?
And Mr. Chairman, this is Deborah Allen. May I ask a question?
You may.
Mr. Van Kerkhoff, I'm following up on what you just said about special uses, because my question is a logistical one. Cannabis is grown indoors. The people who would be adding cannabis to brownies or cookies or making gummies or whatever, that would be an indoor business as well. So I can see how you might drop a kitchen into a property, or you might drop a pole barn growing stuff onto a property. I feel a difference in the retail part. So if we agree to allow cannabis businesses generally, because you can't pick and choose, so we allow them generally, would the special use provisions say, well, it's appropriate to have a grow house out here, but it would be more appropriate to have a retail business closer to a major road or closer to a community or something like that? Would we be able to make those distinctions on where businesses were placed?
That's a good question. Our state's attorney, Aaron Brady, may be on the line with me, but in general, if the county board were to rescind the previous ordinance prohibiting this specific type of businesses, and by those definitions, it's a whole variety of businesses from retail to processing to growing, they would be eligible businesses in Kane County, subject to our zoning ordinance, just like every other type of business. So the county board's land use plan gives direction on appropriate uses throughout the county already. The zoning ordinance or the zoning ordinance and zoning map already has areas that may be approved for those. So there's general guidance for businesses, retail, and propagation and processing facilities already for all the other different types of aspects. I'll use the food industry, for instance. So they would become businesses within that, in that family, I guess, of land uses. So I don't know that it would be easy or even practical to try to presuppose where those should be in the county outside of what's already been established by the county board, by the future land use map and zoning ordinance, and the process for all the variety of special uses, which gives the county board the ability to review it for site-specific proposals. So I hope that maybe answers your question, but let me know if you need more clarification.
Thanks, Mark. Obviously, I'm not as familiar with zoning as I should be, but that's very helpful. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Berman,
Mr. Berman.
I think it should be a special use. But I think that historically we found in the last year that the sale and of cannabis has not been the deterrent that everyone thought it was. Obviously, if you feel that you're against cannabis and the use of it, that's fine. It is legal in the state. It certainly it could be I think in the case of the county, we probably see more of someone from an agricultural standpoint wanting to grow it rather than the sale of it. But whatever it is, I think it would be good to have that opportunity for revenue for the county. So I certainly am in favor of it.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question at this point and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Warnicki,
No.
Fraz,
No.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Next, we have on the agenda planning and special projects.
Good morning. You have in your packet a summary of the work of our Planning and Special Projects team. They provide support for a number of other committees, kind of centralize their work in this report for the Development Committee. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, just ask that you place the report on file. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, let's move to subdivisions. Do we have Deanne on the line, or is it you,
Deanne
Jody?
is on the line for the presentation of the subdivision items.
Okay, Deanne, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I have 3 subdivisions in front of you this morning. The first one is Mar and Sully subdivision. This is located at the very southern end of the county. It is almost off of outside of Kane County's area. If you can slide to the next image there, please. There, perfect, thank you. As you can see, it's down on Baseline Road, just west of Route 31 and south of Route 30. It is surrounded by the village of Montgomery, who has been working with this particular landowner in order to reach an agreement as to how the site will be constructed. Next image, please. This is an aerial showing that the parcel itself has been developed into basically a truck route with a detention pond, and then to the south of the parcel there is an existing residence. As you can see, there's a lot of industrial in the area. The industrial portion of this site will use Bohr Avenue as their access point, and the house that's located to the south will continue using Baseline Road. Next slide, please. This is the final plat of subdivision. It is basically 2 lots, one for the residents and one for the primarily industrial site that will house the truck parking. Next slide, please. It is the recommendation of Kane County Technical Staff that this proposed subdivision be approved.
Thank you. May we have a motion, please? Mr. Kenyon moves, Mr. Fraz seconds. Do we have comments or questions?
Ford, question.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned something about a detention pond. I didn't see it on the on the pit on the.
Oh, if you could go back to the overall aerial, you can see where the trucks are parked, kind of on the northerly 2/3 of the property, and through the middle of the parcel, actually south, in between the trucks and the residents, there is a brown. There it is. That's our detention pond. You can see it was a little bit wet at the time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Warnicki,
Warnicki, yes.
Fraz,
Fraz, yes.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Item B, please. Mill Creek Village Center subdivision.
Again, we have another subdivision. This is a 2-lot subdivision. As you may recall, this was presented to you over a year ago, which is kind of hard to believe. They had requested a minor modification of the PUD. What we have before you is the 2 lots that need to be created as a result of that modification of the PUD. If I may have the next slide, please. The area is located pretty much in the center of the village of Mill Creek. It's south of the existing commercial building on the south side of Harrington Boulevard. Next slide, please. This is a little closer image of what the site currently looks like. You've got the commercial Harrington on the north side of Harrington. To the west, you have multifamily. To the south, you have a combination of multifamily and single-family homes. It's just offset from the roundabout that's over in Mill Creek. Next slide, please. This is the plat showing the difference between where the Lot 1, which will house the commercial portion as well as residential, and Lot 2, which will only hold the residential and an underground parking garage. May I have the next slide? A few things to note on our recommendation. Land cash requirement was met with the original PUD, which was done in May of 1994. As I said before, a minor adjustment was done last year in February to allow for multifamily on the first floor on Lot 2. Kane County technical staff would recommend approval of this project. And for your information, Mr. Dave Patzel of Shodine is also on the line.
And we have a motion, please. Mr. Fries moves. Mr. Brown seconds. Comments or questions, Mr. Fries?
Yeah, we held several meetings outside the county process with neighbors to talk about this area. And if you look on the aerial photo there to the north is what we call the downtown, one of the downtown buildings, the only one that's been completed to date. And the subject of those meetings was to allow the petitioner to build a building here without the requirement that came with the subdivision to put commercial and retail on the first floor. So what we're voting on today is consistent with what the neighbors ultimately agreed to and were informed about and presented to by the developer. So I'm supporting this.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll? Yes, it was Mr. Fries and Mr. Brown. Just a second.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky,
Wonicky, yes.
Fries,
Yes.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Next item is C, Big Timber Oaks.
Thank you. Once again, this is a two-lot subdivision. This seems to be the theme for the today. This parcel is located all the way north in Dundee Township. It's a little over 5.5 acres. It's currently improved with 2 single-story structures that are used in commercial business. May I have the next slide, please? As you can see, this is an aerial showing that this parcel is located west of Randall and just south of Big Timber. Next slide, please. And this parcel is entirely encapsulated by Elgin. We did work with Elgin, the city of Elgin, and when we went through this process, they did not wish to annex into Elgin, so they will remain in the township. I want to call your attention to the 2 buildings, and at the very southern tip of this pie-shaped parcel, you will see a detention pond. You may want to keep that in memory for things coming up here in the short future. May I have the next slide, please? This is the plat of subdivision. It has been rotated for the sake of clarity. Lot 1 is to the north, Lot 2 is to the middle, and to the south is that drainage easement. Next slide, please. It is the recommendation of Kane County staff that this subdivision be approved.
Thank you. May we have a motion and second? Mr. Kenyon moves. Mr. Fries seconds. Comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll? I'm sorry, did I cut somebody off?
Yeah, Berman. What the city of, what was this again? This is
Elgin?
Elgin doesn't want to annex us?
Do they want to? No. At this point in time in the discussions that I had with the planning department over at Elgin, they could not agree with the landowners as far as the zoning that they would fit into. So until such a time as they can come into an agreement where some other issues are presented forward, Elgin and the owners declined to annex.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, clerk please call the roll.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Igbo,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wolnicki,
Moniki, yes.
Fries,
Fraz, yes.
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Motion carries. Next, item 8 on the agenda, environmental resources. Do we have a report today, Ms. Walnick?
No items under environmental resources. The next item would be under water resources.
Thank you. Then let's move on to water resources, item 9.
Thank you. As Deanne just presented the subdivision for this development, we are requesting approval of the ordinance establishing the special service area. If you'll recall, the public hearing for this was held at the last county board meeting. Because the owner signed a letter of no objection, we can go right to the step of establishing that ordinance. This is a requirement under the Kane County Stormwater Ordinance. Should the owner fail to maintain the detention facility or other stormwater aspects of the site, we would be able to levy a tax on this property that would allow us to hire a contractor to go out and do that maintenance. So I would request approval of the ordinance establishing the Big Timber Oak Special Service Area.
Okay, we have a motion,
Motion to
please.
approve.
Moniki moves. Moniki seconds.
Wait, I have a whole flurry here. Who was the man, who was the man who spoke first?
That was Berman.
Okay, Mr. Berman, you won. Mr. Kenyon, since you're here, I'm going to make you the second. We have comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Igbo,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Wolnicki,
Moniki, yes.
Fries.
Yes.
Motion carries. Our 2020 cost share report.
Thank you. Typically, and what I want to do is take a few minutes to go through what our cost share program is for any of the new board members. The Kane County Cost Share Drainage Program was established in 1993 by the county board. And the reason behind this program was to assist residents in unincorporated and small villages with drainage problems that were occurring on multiple properties or within subdivisions. This is not intended to fix farm drainage. It's very specific to the severity of the issue. So we look first at people that have flooding of their main structures where they're living, flooding of their basements, flooding of their septic areas, and then also flooding of their yards. So this program has been operated successfully since 1993. There are no staff whose salaries come out of this program. It is 100% always been funded by the riverboat. And with dwindling funds, obviously that's a concern because this program does help a lot of residents around the county. So typically what we do is we try to establish partnerships with our local road districts and municipalities as well as residents. We split the costs up to 50% of the project cost with those owners. If we do have other partners, we try to reduce that split down to a third. So the funds that we're leveraging from the Riverboat Fund are well expanded beyond what is received with our department. So we are very excited this year to present the 2020 Cost Share Drainage Program projects that were completed. I have to say, of all the bad things that came from the pandemic, this is probably one of the most positive in that many of the program and projects that you will see in the slideshow have been around for many, many years. And I think maybe it was due to the fact that many people were in their homes during the year and saw the severity of many of the rain events that we received, that it kind of was the last straw. And so we were able to complete a lot of projects that had been on our books for quite some time and are excited to present those to you. Next slide, please, Blair. I wanted to give you again some background as to the funding. As I explained, we do stretch this funding as far as we can to assist as many residents as we can possibly. But due to the decrease in the revenue from the riverboat, we have consistently every year reduced our request, as you will see. The year 2016 and 2017 are missing because those are the years that we requested funds from the riverboat to rewrite the stormwater ordinance and do that update. But otherwise, we are consistently trying to do the best with the money that is received. And we appreciate having that conversation this coming year with the Riverboat Committee and how we've tried to maximize use of those riverboat dollars. Next slide, please. We typically in these presentations do point out the flood events that occurred in the previous year. The big flood of 2020 occurred May 13th to May 17th. And one of the big statistics we like to show when that flood did occur was that from 1871, we have had the wettest 3 Mays in that record of time period. So you'll see at the top, the 8.49 is for the year 2020. Right below it is from 2019 and then 2018. And so the result of this is that we see a lot more people with basement issues where they have seepage coming into their basement, some pumps that won't stop running with nowhere for that water to go. It just kind of sits in their yards and causes mosquito issues and issues with their lawns as well, and potentially septic issues. Next slide, please. So we have a few pictures. I know it's really bright in here, so it's kind of hard to see. But these are some photos from the May 2018, the May 18th of 2020. Specifically on the left is your Fox River flooding. The river did come out of its banks, and we did have some structural flooding along in South Elgin area. And then we also did have a localized flooding. So in many of our events, sometimes it's just the river that comes up. And then other events that are more of short duration, we have some localized flooding. In this case, we had both. Next slide, please. So I'll jump into the projects, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rob Linke when I get to his projects. So one of the projects that I worked on was the Bose Bend Drainage Improvement Project. This was a significant area of hundreds of acres that was draining through an old agricultural system. And it had gotten to the point that the water was actually pumping up underneath the roadways in Bose Bend. The Township Road District partnered with us on this project, specifically to help address the issue he was having with his infrastructure. He was not actually able to redo the roadways because of the amount of water that was coming up from underneath the roads. So this will provide him the opportunity to decrease that groundwater that's coming up underneath his roads, as well as provide the residents a positive groundwater control for the area that will enable them to hook up some pumps and curtain drains for their septic areas in the future. Next slide, please. The Windings Ravine Stabilization Project on Harvest Lane was the next project that we completed. We have worked successfully with the Windings Homeowners Association on some severe erosion that's coming into Ferguson Creek over the years. They're a great partner to this program and have done some great work in their open space out there. Next slide, please. The Big Timber Acres low flow system was partnered with Rutland Township Road District for this project. There is severely bad soils historically within Big Timber Acres. This has caused septic issues, sump pump running issues, and this process is putting in a low flow storm sewer system that will enable the residents out there, when they start to have failures in their septic systems, connect to this low flow system, as well as connect sump pumps to eliminate that groundwater from around their houses. So this was the second phase. The previous phase was completed in 2019. Next slide, please. So I want to pause here a minute and turn this over to Rob Linke. I just want to give great praise to Mr. Linke and his work on these projects. These were some of the most severe projects that we have seen in quite some time. I wanted to include a video, but there were many not appropriate words within the video of the water running into somebody's house. But it was quite,
We're not used to that.
Yeah, it was quite dramatic, and it really shows the impact that this program has on individual residents in Kane County. So I want to thank Mr. Linke for his hard work and the time he spent talking with these residents and getting them to work together. It has been a monumental task, and he saw the success of all of that groundwork he had laid this past year. So I'll turn it over to him, and then he's going to turn it back over to me.
All right. Thanks, Jody. Thanks for the opportunity here. Members of the committee, I will be brief. As Jody had said, many of these projects have been long-standing drainage issues. In fact, several of the projects that we completed this year actually were projects that I started when I first started working for the county back in May of 2014. It was my privilege to be able to complete 5 projects this year. Like I said, many of which I started when I first started here. I'd handed to. So the first one I wanted to talk about real quick is our Kelly Road drainage project, which was up in Hampshire Township. We completed this one in May. It was a longstanding issue. It was a collaborative project with the Village of Hampshire, who actually owns and maintains Kelly Road itself. But the unincorporated residents along the south side of the road had some pump issues. There's a broken drain tile that had come through one of the properties and was causing the gentleman on the far right side of that plan, his sump pump was running continuously to the point that if they lost power, their basement would completely flood out. So we were able to get that project done, partnering with the 3 residential landowners as well as the Village of Hampshire, who actually contributed financially, as well as providing labor for the driveway apron replacements and that. So that was a really good project to get done. If you go to the next slide, please. Montague Forest, which is in Plato Township. This was another good project that was a long-standing issue. There was originally a drain tile that runs through the middle of Montague Forest and drains the city of Elgin's Tall Oak subdivision, which you can see at the top portion of the aerial photo there. And that drain tile had failed over the years, had been become overgrown with tree roots. And so we were able to get this project done as well. You can see the root cutter there in the photo to the right. That project was completed in July of 2020. That project was, again, a collaborative effort with financial contributions in addition to the county's cost share funding, but also financially contributions from the Tall Oaks Subdivision Homeowners Association, as well as 25 of the landowners in Montague Forest, not just those directly adjacent to that area highlighted in yellow where the sewer comes through, but also some of the other residents in the subdivision as well. So that was a good project that we were able to complete. Next slide, please. The Pineview subdivision. This is a project out in Caneville Township. This is directly adjacent on the east side of the Kuipers family farm. You may recall that we had worked with Kuipers in the past. They actually provided stormwater storage for us on the Kuipers farm property, which allowed us, that was done back a couple of years back, and that allowed us to work with the Caneville Highway Department, the road district, to put in drain tile improvements and drainage improvements along Pine Tree Drive to solve, again, a longstanding sump pump issue and flooding in the front yards of these 5 property owners along Pine Tree and Shade Tree Lane. So next slide, please. This project was actually completed here just after the first of the year. We had some warm weather in January, and we were relatively warm, especially warm compared to what we've had here the last week. We were able to get this project done. This was, again, another long-standing drainage issue here. We had 5 of the 6 property owners that were receiving surface flooding from this failed drain tile system. The area you see where the red arrow is at, that entire dark area, and actually an area much larger than that, would flood out and have standing water 2 to 3 feet deep for on end during these wet periods, especially over the last 3 years. And again, we were able to cost share with 5 of the property owners. They all kicked in, even a couple of them that have relatively little impacts. So as Jody mentioned, this was kind of a very unique year in that we had folks that were willing to contribute financially kind of for the greater good to solve these problems. So that was another good project that we were happy to get in. And then the last project here, if you go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, those are just some of the improvements, the drain tile that went through on that Plank Road project. And that, again, just showing the work. We had some good contractors working in some pretty cold conditions. Next slide, please. Lundstrom Manor. This is up in Dundee Township. This is just north of the Long Meadow Parkway Bridge off of Route 31. This is an old subdivision that was built in the 1950s, and just wanted to show you some of the pictures of some of the flooding there. We had flooding going into houses, into basements, into garages. You can see that beautiful 69 Chevelle being flooded out there. And that's because the way the subdivision was designed, all of the agricultural lands to the north of this subdivision actually drain through this subdivision with very little provisions put in place to carry that water around. And so you can see the water gushing in the picture to the right between the houses. And in fact, we've even had residents that have gone canoeing and whitewater rafting. The water's actually much worse going down the middle of the road down Crescent Lane in the Lunster Manor subdivision during some of the larger storms, but that's the only one I could find there. Next slide, please. So we started this project back in 2014. This is actually one of the first projects that I was handed when I started working. And we came up with a plan pretty early on to bring to carry this water around. You can see 4 of the 5 residents that were being flooded out there. And we had this plan in place, but we ran into some significant issues with the agricultural landowner to the north, who was fairly uncooperative. But we kept pushing and we kept nagging. And if you go to the next slide, please. Things stayed pretty dormant, I guess, on this project, even though we had a plan in place. We had residents that were willing to do the work. And then, as Jody pointed out, those in her slide there, the May of 2020 flood, the north end of the township during that May event was hit exceedingly hard. And you can see the picture on the left, the chocolate whitewater rapids coming through the agricultural land, because again, the agricultural ditch along the edge was inadequate, but the landowner was uncooperative. But we worked with the landowners, and we were sending the agricultural property owner these photos and the aforementioned video that was went along with this picture that you see on the right there. And as Jody said, I'd love to show it to you, but you can imagine when somebody's shooting video and they're seeing water filling into their basement to a depth of 2 to 3 feet, they had some choice words, so we weren't able to include that. But the good news is by sharing all this information and basically putting a lot of pressure on the agricultural landowner, if you go to the next slide, we were actually able to motivate them to install these improvements. So this project was actually done. We're calling this a drainage cost share project, but the county's portion of this cost share, while we had money set aside a couple years back, but we didn't have the permission and cooperation of the agricultural landowner to do the project, that money had since gone away. In 2020 here, in November of 2020, we were actually able to get this project constructed more or less as we had originally designed, at no cost to the county and at no cost to the residential landowners there. So the agricultural landowner stepped up and was motivated by all of the information that we were sending them and the repeated emails and phone calls. I can't tell you how many phone calls and text messages and emails I sent out for this. If you go to the next slide, and you'll see just kind of that what that final result was here in November before they blanketed and seeded it. But very large channel they had to go in to redirect all this water. And we're feeling pretty confident that this is going to prevent any of those residential landowners from having water flooding through their window wells or through their back doors into their basements like we saw last May. That's the last slide I have. I'll turn it back over to Jody.
Next slide, please, Blair. So of course, we always have remaining challenges. This is the Gulfview neighborhood. We were working very closely with Angie Thomas, the city of Aurora, and now we're working with Ms. Bates regarding this. We did work and submit a joint DCEO grant for infrastructure improvements to the state last spring, and are hopefully awaiting results of that grant request to get the funding that's needed to help resolve some of the issues in this neighborhood. Next slide, please. This is the South Park. It's an unincorporated area by Mastodon Lake in the city of Aurora. This issue in this subdivision goes back well over 30 years. We see them hit every so often, and when they do get hit, it's quite significant. There's been some buyouts in this area, but the biggest challenge that we're faced with is there's running sand and marl, which is actually fossilized seashells that's underneath this land. And so the construction of any type of utility through this area is incredibly expensive. So we're constantly looking for grants for them as well. There'll be needed to be easements, and we're certainly hoping to work with some of the Montgomery Road improvements that KDOT is working on to partner with them to try to get an outfall from this area. Next slide, please. And the last one I believe we have is the Village of Big Rock outfall storm sewer. This would resolve many of the issues that the Village of Big Rock sees along Route 30 and to the north. Right now, they have combined their urban stormwater with the agricultural stormwater, and it's caused an issue for both. So the idea would be to have a storm sewer that runs all the way to Welch Creek to the east. Again, we partnered with the Village of Big Rock and our Office of Community Reinvestment. It was of great assistance in putting together application and working with the village to get all the paperwork that was necessary. This was submitted in spring of last year, and we understand that hopefully we will hear in the first quarter of 2021 here on if we've received that grant to move this project forward. So I think the next slide is just questions. Yes, thank you.
Are there
Hey,
any
Jody,
questions?
this is not a question, but this is something that sets Kane County apart from everybody. We actually care, and our people go out and work. And but 25 landowners up by Kelly Road, can you imagine how much work that is?
Well,
we care about this and help these landowners. And I've watched these projects over the years. A great job done by your office.
Well, and I want to add to that too. I mean, this is to me one of the great things that the county does. And Jody and Rob, I mean, Rob obviously has been rewarded. He's got the only 2-story office in the county I can see from the screen here. But it's a great thing we do. And anybody who has themselves or otherwise observed the horrendous issues we have with some of these older subdivisions that were built at a point in time when engineering wasn't as sophisticated or even non-existent. This just really is one of those rare instances when we as a county with the staff that we've got can offer a direct benefit to people that they can appreciate and benefits them from day one. So I want to thank you and Rob and everybody that's connected with Water Resources. It's just to Mike's point, it's a good thing that we do and we do it well. And I want to make sure the compliments are given. And Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
Once the water is
Mike,
mitigated.
we can't hear
Mike,
it.
please.
We can't hear her, yeah.
That one might not be working.
There we go. That's better. Thank you. Once the water is mitigated, do the landowners, the homeowners, are they able to get a reduction in their property insurance because it's no longer in the floodplain? Because that would save them a significant amount of money.
Most of the projects that we work on are actually not mapped into the floodplain. And that's one of the challenges that we have getting partner money and grants is that when you're mapped into the floodplain, there's a lot of federal funding and opportunities to get these problems resolved. These projects really fall under what the state has termed as urban flooding. And so it's an area that's flooded outside of the floodplain area. And if you look at statistically, and anyone in Kane County can get a floodplain policy. It's certainly much cheaper for residents that are outside of a mapped floodplain as opposed to in a mapped floodplain. So many of the residents are aware of historic flooding in their area and do have a very inexpensive floodplain policy. And so it benefits them in the fact that they now have this infrastructure that supports them. And their fairly affordable floodplain plan also helps them if they do ever flood again.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Jody, this is
Questions
Rob.
or
Can I
comments?
jump in for one quick second?
Rob?
I just wanted to point out to everybody, well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind remarks. But what I wanted to point out is, as Jody had mentioned, that a lot of these areas that we're working on are urban flood areas that are outside of the mapped FEMA floodplain. And I just wanted to point out a resource that we've been working on that's actually available to anyone from the county, but I certainly want to direct all of the folks that are online here and members of the development committee. If you just Google Kane County Stormwater Management and you go to the county's website, we have a set of maps that we've developed recently that are online. It's called the Countywide Flood Inundation Maps. And we've partnered with our Kane County GIS Technologies Department, and we have a draft set of these maps up that provide some pretty good pictures of all of these potential urban flooding areas that don't show up in the FEMA floodplains. And so I just want to point out those maps are available for any of you guys or any of your constituents, that you can look at those maps, and those will help. I think it's a great resource. It's something we're working really hard to develop and to ultimately finalize. But I would just encourage you to check those out. Many of the projects that we presented here, you would actually see those areas show up on those maps as well. So that's it.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Wolnick? Mr. Berger, are you on the line?
Good morning, Mr. Martin. I'm here. I have nothing for you this morning, though.
Thank you. A very welcome answer. We have no Settlers Hill update. Do we have new business? Hearing, seeing none. May I have a motion, please, to place reports on file? Mr. Fraz moves, Mr. Brown seconds. Comments or questions? Hearing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Berman,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Igbo,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Warnicki,
Warnicki, yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
and Caius.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. We have no need of executive session. May I please have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Kenyon moves.
Get us on the road.
Mr. Brown seconds. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying
Aye.
Aye.